National Congress on our in what is in fact an exceptional circumstance where we have had for this week. This would actually be our second installment with respect to our midweek press briefing. Yesterday, the Honorable MP Khadija Amin would have sat where I am sitting now and would have presented a litany of information as it pertains to issues related to flooding within Trinidad and Tobago and the lack of resources and attention being properly paid to specific areas within this country as it pertains to preparation and preparatory work during the dry season, which could have avoided some of the horrendous scenes that we've seen actually being played out within Trinidad and Tobago over the last couple of days. We are very grateful that our opposition leader would have mandated all members of the opposition in whatever capacity that they could to go out there and assist persons who are in need in this really significant time and of flooding within Trinidad and Tobago. However, this morning I am here to treat with two particular issues that would have arisen over the last couple of days. We, during the course of this week, would have surpassed the most amount of murders that Trinidad and Tobago has ever recorded within the history of our country or of our nation. We are over 555 or 56 murders for the year, and we can clearly see that we are on an unfortunate trajectory to either reach or surpass 600 murders within Trinidad and Tobago, recording that as a statistic within this country, a statistic that we are not proud of as citizens of this country, a statistic that we detest as members of the opposition. And we are here, or I am actually here this morning, to indicate categorically, as I have done in the past, why we are where we are. Based upon that figure being surpassed within this current week, members of the media would have asked the Commissioner of Police, Acting Commissioner of Police, Mr. MacDonald Jacob, to rate himself with respect to his activities having adopted the mantle of Acting Commissioner of Police, as it pertains to this horrendous figure now being recorded under his tenure as Acting Commissioner of Police. I will treat with some of the issues based upon that interview, and also I will also deal with certain issues that would have arisen subsequent to a joint select committee of national security that was held yesterday, where all of the nation's local newspapers are now clearly, one can see what that particular issue is that would have come out from that joint select committee, which is the issues as it pertains to no scanners on the ports of the country. So you have the Daily Express saying waterfront scandal, port without single scanner to detect guns, drugs. You have the Trinidad and Tobago Newsday also saying JSC puts gun entry through legal ports in its sites, customs under fire. And in the Trinidad and Tobago Guardian, you have customs in the dark. All of them tethered to what took place and transpired within that joint select committee on national security that was held yesterday, and the revelations that would have come out from that joint select committee. Now, as it pertains to the interview that Acting Commissioner of Police Jacob had, he revealed, well, apart from rating himself and giving himself a B+, which I and all other members of the opposition totally disagree with. One is cognizant of the fact that Trinidad and Tobago has never faced this type of crime surge that we are currently facing now. And so for anyone who has any responsibility, Acting Commissioner of Police Jacob, Minister of National Security Fitzgerald Hines, and our absent and non-existent Prime Minister, who is the chair of the National Security Council, it is beyond belief that someone would actually rate themselves by giving themselves a B+ with respect to the carnage that is in fact Trinidad and Tobago. I would have commented and spoken to some other persons as recently as this morning, and the most appropriate grade that could be given to anyone who's presided over 555 plus murders within the year, the most amount of murders that Trinidad and Tobago has ever seen, would have been the apt rating to be given to someone like that would be an F. And it is really not beyond any of us to also understand that F could be specifically connected to his line minister, which is Mr. Fitzgerald Hines. And the F, in fact, is not for Fitzgerald, it's actually for failure. This entire administration, either through Acting Commissioner of Police Jacobs, through Minister of Hines, and even the Chair of the National Security Council, the Prime Minister, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has failed Trinidad and Tobago with respect to its mandate as it pertains to ensuring that citizens within this country feel safe, that they are in fact safe and they are in fact protected. This is not the case. Any law-abiding citizen within this country, any objective-minded person within this country would be able to attest as to how scared and frightened they are on a daily basis with respect to their normal activities within Trinidad and Tobago. And a murder rate that we have currently specifically demonstrates why they feel how they feel. When Acting Commissioner of Police Jacob was interviewed, he would have said a number of things as it pertains to his view and his opinion. He opined as it pertains to the current crime situation within Trinidad and Tobago. But one of the things that struck me as in terms of his interview, he spoke about the evolution of crime, saying that we have a very unique situation here in Trinidad and Tobago, where we now have for the first time in our history a proliferation of high-powered rifles, and there's a clear evidence to show that for the first time in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, the TTPS has seized 115 high-powered weapons that is creating mayhem. This is nothing new. As an opposition, a responsible opposition, we have been calling on the government to provide the resources to the TTPS and other arms and apparatus of the Ministry of National Security and all other securing agencies within this country to combat the proliferation of high-powered rifles hitting our streets in Trinidad and Tobago. Those guns are not being procured by law-abiding citizens. Those guns are not being procured by school teachers. Those guns are not being procured by firemen. Those guns are being procured by gangsters who go out there and wreak havoc upon the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago. And we have always spoken about the de-evolution of crime and criminal elements within this country. That persons would procure these high-powered rifles, they would go after intended targets. But because they are in fact high-powered rifles, you have situations where a lot of persons within this country are unfortunately becoming collateral damage. They are forming that part or that, being part of that statistic, which we hate to coin, we hate to say, but that is the fact of the situation. And part of that collateral damage now, unfortunately, are minors within this country, tender-age children who are being gunned down. And the response from the government, the response, unfortunately, from the Minister of National Security cannot be that a child was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or that persons didn't intend to kill the child. They went to shoot up a house to deter persons from going to a birthday party. That cannot be any type of palatable excuse or solution to the problem that we are facing. And so when I read that particular article, to hear someone who has, in fact, the mantle to treat with crime and criminality within this country, actually patting himself on the back and giving himself a B+ rating, it was abysmal. I could not believe that someone would actually say that. Why didn't you say what you actually needed from the government? That you are not being resourced properly. These are the truths that the nation is wanting, or that they need to hear from you. The blame must be affixed somewhere. And if you still continue to remain silent on the issues that are plaguing your ability or hampering your ability to actually arrest the criminal situation within this country, then it is right for persons within this country to call upon you to demit office. The same way that a responsible opposition, as we are calling upon the government to get rid of Fitzgerald Hines and to actually put someone there who may have the temerity, the bravado, the intelligence, the know-how to treat with crime within this country. You know, and within that particular interview, the Acting Commissioner of Police went on to say that for the first time, The situation was further compounded by the inclusion of Venezuelan nationals who were not present in TNT in 2008, but surfaced from 2018 to the present, some of who are now involved in crime. We have clear evidence where some of them are involved in criminal activities and would show that within the past few years, we have a number of them who were charged for possession of firearms and ammunition in our country. This is what Jacob would have said in the interview. He went on to say over 240 Venezuelan nationals have been charged with serious offenses within the past 3 years. Over 240 Venezuelan nationals. These are the statistics. These are the words of the acting commissioner of police. Over 240 Venezuelan nationals have been charged with serious offenses within the past 3 years. Now, as I sit here before you this morning, I want to make it abundantly clear. The opposition has always been in support of assisting our Venezuelan brothers and sisters, migrants within this country, as best as we can. Our opposition leader, Senior Counsel Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, has always advocated, especially when it comes to the children of migrants, to have access to education. She's always advocated for that. We feel for our Venezuelan brothers and sisters and all migrants who may be escaping persecution wherever they may be coming from. I sit here before you as a member of the UNCHR team of lawyers, battery of lawyers, that assist pro bono individuals who come into this country and may be affected in more ways than one as it pertains to legal issues. So we are not heartless. It's not a position that we don't care. But we equally have a responsibility to ensure that the safety and security of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago are paramount within our minds. And that is why I continue to say, not only at today's press conference, but at other conferences, in the parliament, outside the parliament, on the pavement, on the platform, on a number of issues, we've raised this issue with respect to the way in which migrants would have been assimilated within life in Trinidad and Tobago in 2018 into June specifically of 2019. And as I would have been doing some reflection, I remember being in the Senate, and on the 25th of June 2019, we, under the leadership of the Senate bench, Senator the Honorable Wade Mark, would have moved a motion to annul the immigration regulations that the current administration would have attempted to put in place, which they eventually did in fact put in place. And one of the reasons that we raised that motion is because we understood, based upon the experience of attorneys, based upon the experience of persons within the party, with respect to assimilating migrants within Trinidad and Tobago, we understood the challenges that would be faced with respect to such an exercise. And we asked the government specific questions, which to date they have not answered. We knew that there would have been issues with respect to checking persons' certificates of character, tracing their criminal history. Because they were foreigners, it would not have been able for them to obtain that information locally. So they would have had to contact international partners, Interpol and whatnot, to procure this information, so that they would know how to treat with these individuals. None of those questions, none of those issues that we raised, the government took on board and dealt with it back then in 2019. And we told them within the parliament that if these issues are not checked, if these issues are not dealt with, you're going to have a situation where you will be allowing persons who have criminal records for the most heinous offenses into Trinidad and Tobago. And what they would do is assimilate into gang life in Trinidad and Tobago. And you would see the evident problems coming out of such a situation within the very near future. Well, guess what, Trinidad and Tobago? We are here. The government did not adopt those issues that we raised. They didn't treat with any one of them. And now you have an acting commissioner of police admitting that foreign gangs are operating within Trinidad and Tobago. You have an acting commissioner of police giving statistics with respect to the amount of foreign nationals, Venezuelan nationals, who have been charged for serious criminal offenses within this country. And you have graphic scenes being played out within Trinidad and Tobago. I would have said it at the last press conference. You have issues now where persons' limbs are being hacked off so that they cannot be identified. As recently as last week, I believe there would have been a headless body that would have been found in Maloney. Up to this date, that body has not been identified. No idea has been affixed to that person. And the situation is going to get worse. This type of gangland killing that is specifically tethered to South America and places within that region is extremely graphic and gory. Many persons, when they are traversing the highways early in the morning, a scene that is played out in South America where bodies are being strewn from walkovers and flyovers. We are not very far from that. And many of you who are going to be traversing that highway 5, 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning to find yourselves up into Port of Spain, as you're driving up there sleepy, you'll be wiping your eyes because you want to know what it is hanging and dangling from a walkover or flyover. We are going to get there. Because this particular administration has no foresight, they have no plan, and it has been borne out in terms of what we are seeing playing out in the streets of Trinidad and Tobago. And you are driving up the highway or facing what the Guardian is showing here, all this set of traffic to come back down to San Fernando. Why? Same thing, lack of foresight. Under our partnership administration, there were moves to decentralize certain services from Port of Spain. But for the PNM, it is better to have those services in Port of Spain because there are rentals being paid to friends, families, and finances of this particular administration that will cause persons to go through that. I sit here today and I have some serious questions that I want to put to Minister Hines, Stuart Young, the chair of the National Security Council, the Prime Minister himself, if he can in fact be found. What has happened to all of those Venezuelan migrants that you may have in fact procured certificates of good character for, where you've come upon or stumbled upon persons who have in fact convictions for serious offenses in Venezuela, persons who may have absconded from serious offenses in Venezuela? What have you done with that information? How many persons have you arrested or repatriated to Venezuela based upon that information? How many persons are reporting properly to the immigration officials based upon the residence or address that they would have given to immigration and to the ministry when they procured this card? How many of them are actually reporting to immigration? How many of them are actually residing at the places that they say that they were residing at when they actually procured the card in the first place? What steps are being taken by the Ministry of National Security in light of the statistics revealed by the Acting Commissioner of Police with respect to foreign gangs operating within Trinidad and Tobago? How are you arresting that situation? We need those answers. And with the greatest of respect, it is clear that we are not going to get it from Hines. So I'm calling on the Prime Minister of this country to address Trinidad and Tobago and let us know what your plans are to treat with this particular situation. Because it is going to get worse. And we are not happy in the opposition with the situation currently. And that issue, as it pertains to crime and criminality, moves us squarely along and tethers us squarely along to the issues that would have come out from the Joint Select Committee yesterday. I don't know why on all of these newspapers and all of the information that is coming out that persons are shocked that there are no scanners on the port. We have been saying that for the last 2 or 3 years, that there are no scanners operating within the ports of this country. That is why you have a flow of illegal guns, drugs, and in some instances, bodies coming into Trinidad and Tobago. And since we've been calling upon the government to treat with that situation, no one has said a word. So it upset me greatly when I read the newspapers to learn that certain members of the Joint Select Committee were surprised by the revelations made. And I dare say, and I stand to be corrected if I am in fact incorrect in terms of my submissions, that it was not the members of the opposition who were surprised by the revelations, because it's the same opposition that would have called for these types of meetings to be held by the Joint Select Committee. Our representatives there, MP Munilal and Senator Lochmedial. It is the same members of the Joint Select Committee, MP Munilal and Senator Lochmedial, under the astute leadership of Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, that have been calling upon the Joint Select Committee chair to convene specialist type meetings to treat with this issue, to call before the Joint Select Committee, the chair of the National Security Council and the Minister of National Security to address the GSC on these issues with respect to the rise in crime and criminality within Trinidad and Tobago. So the opposition is not surprised by the revelations. We knew that this was the issue. What the opposition expected to happen yesterday was some type of information or solution coming out of that GSC, an immediate solution to arrest the situation. But that did not happen. What you had was a revelation that there are around 23 or 24,000 containers coming into this country, and only roughly about 3,900 of them are being checked. That is the revelation coming out. So you have about 19,000 containers coming into this country unchecked. And when people talk about containers, I want the public to understand what is going on. When a man pack a container, it's not pack it, you pack any container, to send it to Trinidad or send it wherever, You know, we as Trinbagonians, the terminology is stuff the container, but that's what's happening. So they stuff a container from top to bottom, and 19,000 of them are stuffed like that, with all sorts of illicit material, guns, drugs, and whatever coming into Trinidad and Tobago. And you only have a minimum amount of them actually being checked. Then you could understand the reality that we live in currently. You could understand that it is not just a flow of guns coming into this country. It is not just a flow of drugs coming into this country. It is an ocean of these illegal instruments coming into this country. And there is nobody to check these things properly. There is no machinery, no infrastructure there. There is no manpower there. At the Joint Select Committee, the customs officials had to also indicate that it is about, they essentially would like about 700 persons working for customs. But currently they are operating on 272 persons who have some experience and about 82 who were recently hired. That is the position with respect to manpower. And those members of the Joint Select Committee, the PNM members, the government members, want to utilize the GSC in some way, form, or fashion to blame customs officials for what is transpiring on our ports within this country. Or you want to blame the customs officials? You feel they're working there like witness protection, where they will dip in their pockets and go and pay for a scanner? No, that's not the position. The scanner costing $1 million US. Where you want them to get that from? How you want to blame them for that? That is your failure. You are the executive. The money comes from you. So all of these pieces of information, all of this surprising information, it shouldn't be surprising to any members of the government on that GSC. It is part of your administration's fault. And we have been constantly echoing those sentiments. Where are the scanners for the ports? Where are the jammers for the prisons? They are non-existent. What are you doing about it as a government? Where is the chair of the National Security Council? Where's the response from Minister Hines on these issues? If you are so surprised, shocked, flabbergasted by the revelations coming out, you should have been at a press conference this morning. Instead of my press conference this morning, it should be your press conference this morning, telling the country what you are going to do about this issue. But yet, just like your leader, you are absent. And the country is paying for it in blood and tears from the victims who are left surviving those who've died, who've been murdered. 500 and something of them. And then members of the GSC yesterday going to ask customs officials who were there. Well, listen, I understand this issue with the scanners. I was at a GSC in 2018. And in 2018, I was under the impression that the issue of the scanners was related to some union leader. Always looking to deflect and to blame others. And the customs officials had to tell them, no, that had nothing to do with no union leader. The fact is that the scanners were there because they were donated by the US in and around that time of 2018. But the scanners are non-functioning because they weren't maintained. And the reason they weren't maintained is because the government was not providing the resources the funding to maintain said scanners. So who is to blame? Kamla Prasad Bisasa was not the Prime Minister of the country in 2018. The UNC was in the government of the day in 2018. It is the same PNM. The same PNM that these same Joint Select Committee members are a part of. Are part of that government, that administration, that is to blame for the breakdown in the scanners, the lack of maintenance. Who is to blame for customs officials not having the complement of individuals that they require to conduct the duties that they're supposed to be doing? It is not customs officials for that. It's not the comptroller of customs who's responsible for hiring these people. The government is the one to blame. It squarely lies at their feet. And we've been saying this for some time, that these issues are specifically connected to a lack of political will, because it's definitely not for a lack of funding and resources, because they have money to do all sorts of foolishness, to politically witch hunt those in the opposition, to spend $40 million for some SRP to be doing all sorts of foolishness, to pay Nelson all sorts of money for our indemnity agreement that has fallen down, to buy paintings and to pay rent to all sorts of persons within this country connected to cabinet officials, to fix a set of buildings around the savannah. They have money to do all of those things, but they don't have the executive will, the political will. They don't have the money and the resources to treat with these issues that are plaguing citizens within this country. They don't have the money to provide pumps to fix issues as it pertains to flooding. They don't have the political will to clear drains during the dry season. They don't have the political will to purchase these scanners to place on the port. And when there's that breakdown, when there's that vacuum and lack of political will and know-how, what you have evident in Trinidad and Tobago is the carnage, is the anarchy of a society that we are living in. It is the breakdown of democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. That is what you are left with. You are left with 550 something persons being killed within this country. You are left with a lot of single parents now. A lot of children without parents at all. That is what you are left with in Trinidad and Tobago. We are asking this government, this inept government, this inept Minister of National Security, an absent chair of the National Security Council and the Prime Minister of this country, to arrest this situation immediately. In the short term, get rid of Hines. In the long term, and when I mean long term, maybe as long as next week, the entire government could go. Because there's nobody in that pack of jokers that you could reshuffle in terms of replacing Hines that will alleviate the crime situation in this country. The entire administration needs to go. You need to start to prioritize people in Trinidad and Tobago instead of prioritizing yourselves. Prioritize the issues and the necessities of the customs officials. Prioritize scanners. Prioritize jammers within this country in the prisons. Prioritize people within Trinidad and Tobago. Because your lack of so doing will continue to result in bloodshed in Trinidad and Tobago. Your lack of so doing will continue to result in a proliferation of arms and ammunition within Trinidad and Tobago. Your lack of so doing will lead to a breakdown in the fabric of society that has kept us as a country together. Your lack of so doing will result in a breakdown of democracy within Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, get your priorities straight. Trinidad and Tobago is demanding that of you and your government. If there are any questions that have come in, I would be more than minded to answer them at this juncture.
Just a question, Mr. Subas. This one, for the past 2 years, the government has been pushing for draconian legislation, particularly with regards to bail and so forth. Given the latest revelations about what's occurring at the port, do you think that the government has sort of had their priorities misplaced?
Of course. I mean, that's why I ended my contribution by saying that the government needs to get their priorities in order and start prioritizing people. I have said it on a number of occasions. Legislation alone will not fix the crime situation we have in Trinidad and Tobago. And clearly, based upon what has come out from the JSC, one would understand that it doesn't require legislation to put a scanner on the port. It doesn't require legislation to ensure that the scanners, when they are in fact placed on the port, that they are maintained properly so that they don't break down and they have these issues that we are seeing now coming out from the Joint Select Committee. And as I would have said even previously, we would have had strict bail legislation within this country up until March of this year as it pertains to murder. There was no bail for murder. That was the law of the land. And the murder rate in previous years was also extremely high. So to say then that if it is we pass some strict bail legislation that it is going to fix the crime situation in this country, nothing could be farther from the truth. And we've said that on a number of occasions. We said bring good legislation coupled with efficiently working systems within this country, apparatuses that are tied to the Ministry of National Security and so on. That is what will fix crime within this country. And we as a responsible opposition, we were more than prepared to assist the government. And on a number of occasions, I would have called out all the pieces of criminal or criminally geared legislation geared to fix crime within this country that the opposition would have supported under the leadership of Mrs. Prasad Bisessa. A number of those legislations we've assisted in fixing, in passing, working with the government to redound to the citizenry of this country, the benefit of the citizenry of this country. But legislation alone, an aggressive legislative agenda alone will not fix crime within Trinidad and Tobago. And apart from fixing the lack of apparatus that we have, or providing those with the apparatus that they need, there are other social or socio-economic issues that need to be addressed. And we've spoken about that as well too, that there are persons who are not so educationally inclined, that the technical and vocational schools that were shut down, the programs within those schools also that were removed, that were jettisoned, they need to come back. That is an all-of-government approach that is required and needed to fix crime. And if the government is not prepared to do so, call an election and let the opposition take over and let us deal with it as astutely as we've done in the past under Mrs. Prasad Bisessa.
Mr. Sobers, this past October, there was a massive drug bust in St. Kitts involving a vessel which was registered in Trinidad. In 2020, there was also $160 million drug bust off the coast of Trinidad. Considering that no scanners, well, we know now that no scanners have been working on ports since 2021, are you concerned that the level of drug trafficking and gun trafficking is being significantly conducted without any kind of...
I am convinced that all sorts of trafficking has been increased within this country. We speak most of the time about guns and drugs, but there's also a significant amount of human trafficking that is also taking place. And unless we have systems in place and the correct tools in place to assist the officials who are in charge of those ports of entry and members of the national security apparatus going out there with the requisite amount of tools and resources, then you will continue to see an increase and flow within, as it pertains to guns, drugs, and bodies within Trinidad and out of Trinidad to foreign jurisdictions. And so we continuously call upon the administration to arrest these issues and to deal, especially with these revelations coming out of the JSC as it pertains to manpower shortages at the customs department, and also the issues with respect to these scanners on the ports.
At the JSC, Customs and Excise Controller Vidya Marcial stressed that despite the absence of the scanners, they were doing their best, but they were coping with severe staff shortages.
Yes.
These things seem like things that could be immediately
Addressed. Yes.
So why do you think it's not being addressed?
Because there's a lack of political will. Priorities are mixed up. Instead of spending monies that they have in places that require them, they're utilizing the monies to do all sorts of foolishness. The rampant flooding within Trinidad and Tobago over the last couple of days, the loss of persons' property, the loss of livestock, all of that is specifically tethered to an administration who have their priorities mixed up. If the money was being utilized in a particular way to address these issues, these simple issues that are being raised by individuals now, once given the opportunity to say what these issues are, then we would not have these problems. But clearly, the priority for this particular administration lies with serving other people as opposed to the masses within this country. And that has to change. Or else we'll continue to see the headlines that we are seeing currently within Trinidad and Tobago. We'll continue to see a murder rate that will continue to rise unabated within Trinidad and Tobago. We'll continue to see persons having issues with respect to flooding and infrastructure. We'll continue to see high food prices within Trinidad and Tobago. We'll continue to see all sectors across the landscape of Trinidad and Tobago fall down under this administration because they do not prioritize people within Trinidad and Tobago.
Ms. Marcial at TJC also pointed out that there was a budget allocation of $90 million to address some of these issues, and that one of these scanners would cost about $1 million US. Do you think that the Minister of Finance also perhaps should explain as to why this money has not been spent?
Well, clearly because the customs and excise within Trinidad and Tobago falls under the remit of the Ministry of Finance. It does not fall under the remit of the Ministry of National Security. And so, if the Ministry of Finance has responsibility over customs and excise, and these problems that they are facing have been put to him, and he's not treated with it, then he has some questions to answer. He needs to come out and indicate why, if he's been in receipt of this information, he's not done anything about it. At this late stage, persons must be held accountable, because, as I said before, the end result of their failures is not just a rap on one's knee or a rap on the knuckles. It is a loss of life. Every single time an illegal firearm comes through those ports, having not been picked up through scanning, it goes into the hands of someone who has an illicit and ferocious appetite for murder and bloodshed. It goes into the hands of an individual who is going to commit an atrocious act upon another person within Trinidad and Tobago. And the end result, unfortunately, where we are going, the trajectory where we are going, is that the loss of life is not only between one gangster and another. Collateral damage is real within this country, and it is not specifically tethered to an adult anymore. Tender age children are being killed now because of those guns flowing within Trinidad and Tobago. And I don't know what other issue, what other problem, what other gory newspaper detail would move any one of those ministers within the cabinet to actually do their job and do something about these issues plaguing not only customs but the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago and all other ministries within this country. Start to prioritize people.
Getting back to Mr. Jacobs, yesterday Mr. Jacobs defended the B+ rating he gave to himself, saying that this was in consideration to the fact that he is yet to work with the full complement of deputy commissioners of police, as well as the results of a manpower audit report that has been done since 2017, but which has yet to be effective. What do you respond to that?
So essentially what he is saying is that he can't do his job effectively because he hasn't received certain information from an audit report that was completed since 2017 under this particular administration. He cannot do his job because he doesn't have the full complement of DCPs to assist him in so doing, but yet they are acting DCPs who I would hope that they are in fact assisting him currently. The fact remains the same. The issues that plagues the TTPS in terms of them effectively dealing with crime and criminality within Trinidad and Tobago are squarely connected to the Ministry of National Security and the Minister of National Security. The lack of resources in terms of intelligence, the lack of resources in terms of normal instruments for police officers to do their jobs, the lack of resources as it pertains to cameras, the lack of resources as it pertains to working vehicles, the lack of resources as it pertains to personnel in some instances. All of those things are squarely connected to the Minister of National Security. As it pertains to the B+ rating, he can defend that how much he wants. In our opinion, and in the opinion of any level-headed person within this country, they will attach an F to him as it pertains to his custody of the TTPS and presiding over the highest murder rate this country has ever seen in its existence.
Mr. Sobers, I think for members of the public, there seems to be a lot of blame passing going around. So the police are saying that the importation of guns is due to the fault of customs. Customs is saying that it's not their fault, they're being under-resourced by the government, and the government is then sort of going back saying, well, no, it's not us, it's the police. The public is frustrated by, I think, all of this blame passing. How do you think this could be resolved?
I am frustrated. Every single law-abiding citizen within this country is frustrated. And they are frustrated because essentially the only entity within this country that has the ability to fix all of those issues is the government. Customs cannot buy the scanners on their own. The comptroller of customs can't just dip in the treasury and take $1 million and buy a scanner. She cannot do that. Officers attached to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, extremely hardworking individuals, they cannot go to customs house and tell them, put a scanner there. They as well too can't dip in their pockets, although sometimes they do, because they don't have any choice, to fix these issues. The only entity that has the ability to deal with it, who has custody of the treasury, who has custody of the money, the resources to solve these problems, are the government. And in most instances, they have the money. They choose to spend it on other things that does not bring relief to the members of the public within this country. It doesn't allay the fears that we have as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So in terms of the blame being passed along as a political football between customs and police and whoever and what, that for me doesn't arise. The issue is squarely bolted and tethered to the PNM's chest. They are the ones who signed that social contract with persons in August of 2020 to provide them with security. They are the ones who signed that social contract with persons in August of 2020 to provide them with a stable economy. And they are the ones who are failing in both regards within this country. And so, in my estimation and considered view, the only solution is for them to demit office and let another government, which is the UNC, the actual government in waiting, take control of this country and lead it finally into some good years of prosperity.
Do you think if the government fails to really get a handle of what's going on at the port, that it simply fuels speculation by a large minority of people in this country who believe that the failure of the scanners and the staff shortages and so on are not necessarily negligence, but willful negligence, that the government is serving the interests of some in this country who want there to be this lax security on the port?
Well, that has been a conversation that has been ongoing for many years, especially as it pertains to a PNM administration being in government in Trinidad and Tobago. What I can say is that one particular member of the Joint Select Committee on the government side attempted to accuse the customs officials in terms of the lack of the scanners and the lack of manpower, whether or not it was gross negligence. And I would want to say I agree with the question being put, but it should not have been put to the customs official. The customs official should have put that to them, that the lack of these things being implemented within this country is gross negligence on the part of the PNM. And maybe I agree with the question that you posed. It may not even be gross negligence, but it may be willful and deliberate. And all of these things will come to bear very soon. Persons in this country cannot take this type of pressure. The revelations that are affixed to the pressure and the ease at which some of these things could be dealt with by the administration, augmentation of customs officials and provision of scanners and whatnot, the ease of doing that is mind-boggling. And persons will continue through the opposition to demand more from those who are in authority. And if they can't, as I said before, demote office and let someone who has the political will to deal with it do so.
You mentioned the presence of South American gangs right now in China. We know that a few years ago the government had a migrant registration policy.
Yes,
this was supposed to partly help deal with this issue that we were supposed to know
regulate
of migrants in the country. Do you think that the fact that there are gangs now in Trinidad means that this policy has effectively failed?
Yes, the policy actually failed before it even started. And that is why, as a responsible opposition, we are tempted to ask certain questions of the government to ensure then that proper regulations were being put in place and that any loopholes that may have arisen would have been plugged. Hence the reason why in 2019 we actually laid under the leadership of Senator Mark in the Senate, we laid that motion to question and to annul the regulations as they were, because we believed then that they were unfit and improper to treat with the issue of the migrants within Trinidad and Tobago. Unfortunately, whilst in the Senate at that juncture, the government did not treat with any of the issues that we raised. They, in their normal cavalier fashion, decided to avoid and deflect as it pertains to the questions, the real important and pertinent questions that were being put to them. And now what you have bearing itself out by statistics and information being revealed by the Acting Commissioner of Police brings to light and to truth actually the issues that we were raising back in 2019, that a regulation that would have been put in place to deal with migrants, to regulate them, to ensure that they have their addresses, their numbers, their statuses in a particular way, was handled poorly by this administration. And one of the paramount concerns that we had then, and we continue to have now, is as it pertains to the tracing of criminal records of persons who would have been assimilated within Trinbagonian society back in 2019. And now the question that is paramount in our minds, as I would have indicated at the press conference, or put actually at the press conference earlier on in the conference, is to the Minister of National Security and the Chair of the National Security Council. What are you doing about these issues based upon the statistics that the Acting Commissioner of Police would have raised? How are you dealing with persons who you found, or if you may or may not have found out, to have criminal records? How are you arresting these persons? How are you deporting these persons? How are you finding these persons based upon the procuring of that particular set of information? And unless we get those answers from the government, then we will be kept in the dark, and a rise and involvement in foreign nationals in criminal gangs locally here will continue unabated.
Mr. Silver, there's very persistent rumors today amongst government officials that the Prime Minister is about to make a cabinet reshuffle today, and that possibly Minister Hines will be replaced. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I am moved either way. I mean, I replace with whom? Replace with whom? Respectfully. Essentially, all of those persons within that cabinet are inept. They will be unable to treat with this situation. Because if Hines couldn't do it, I can't see anybody else inside there that will be capable of doing it. So essentially, I am not moved one way or the other. They get rid of Hines, okay, no problem. That's good. I mean, he is in fact extremely terrible at his job. But essentially, the rest of them are going to fail as well too. They are bound to fail because they are not utilizing or objectively dealing with this issue in an all-of-government way, which is what we've been constantly saying to them. And so if it is, you wanted a comment from me, if they intend to call an election tomorrow or give a date for an election, well, then I'll say, okay, fine. That is something that we could look forward to. But as it pertains to getting rid of Hines, we will be here next week and the situation will still remain the same. They don't have a clue. They don't have a plan. They don't prioritize persons and the issues within this country as they're supposed to. And we will continue to have the situation that we are facing now after that change, or if it is in fact made.
Lastly, at DJC as well, Minister Ayanna Webster Roy questioned whether or not customs should continue to fall under the finance ministry, and perhaps whether or not that needed to be revisited. Mr. Jacobs himself felt that needed to be revisited. What is the opposition's thought?
I am of the considered view that maybe customs should be brought under the Ministry of National Security, or at least an arm of it should be brought under the Ministry of National Security. However, it doesn't matter if it is you shift customs from finance or national security. If you do not have an administration that is willing to treat with the issues that are being raised by any type of division, then you're going to have the same problem whether you shift them from finance to national security or agriculture or wherever. You need to deal with these issues frontally. The people are saying to you, we don't have sufficient staff, you need to augment us. It don't matter if they're in national security or finance, just get it done. The people are saying we don't have scanners, we asked for the scanners, we had the scanners before, we needed money for the maintenance, it didn't provide us with it. It doesn't matter if they're under finance or national security, give them the money to maintain the scanners. Now they have no scanners, they need the scanners now. Give them the money to purchase the scanners. So whether you shift them from national security or from finance or to national security, it may not make a difference because the issues will still be there and persons will still choose to ignore those issues, and essentially the only persons that are going to pay for that is the public.
Okay, those are all the questions we have.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Trinidad and Tobago, members of the media, for joining us this morning at another midweek press conference that was exacerbated by the revelations within the Joint Select Committee. As a responsible opposition, we will continue to keep our finger on the pulse within this country and continue to keep the government and this administration in check. As we see any issues arise, we will bring our views on those issues squarely and directly to you, and we will continue to be a watchdog on behalf of democracy under the leadership of Mrs. Prasad Bisasa. Thank you very much for joining us.
Attention residents, the defenders of our democracy invite you to a meeting tomorrow afternoon at 6 p.m. in front of the UNC office at the White Tent. Come out and hear an attorney at law, Kyle Taklal Singh, chairman and coordinator for the constituency of Labre, Victor Roberts, and a whole lot more. Come out as they tell you why you must join the public march on Saturday the 10th of December at 7 a.m. starting right in Palo Seco Junction and would end at Palmis Park in San Fernando. Yes, come out tomorrow afternoon at 6 p.m. sharp as we discuss, as we bring you up to date in relation to the crime situation, the high cost of living, the bad infrastructure, and a whole lot more. Come one, come all. Thank you.